Today we're going to take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly bowls that I made on previous videos. These are bowls that have dried or equalized and are pretty much done changing shape and moving around after the turning process. Many times when I get done turning a video that I share with you guys, the bowls are usually wet and still have to cure and dry, which brings up the fact that I get a lot of comments and emails from people saying, I think that bowl is going to crack, or what's going to happen to that bowl when it dries, or what will change, etc., etc. And quite honestly, I'm very curious many times because not all bowls turn out as you might guess. And there's one that I'll share with you today that didn't turn out the way I hoped it had turned out. It's not completely lost, but it's definitely not the way I hoped it to turn out. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first bowl that I'm going to share with you guys is the yard waste bowl. In this video, I shared with you how just finding a small piece of wood in your yard or in the ditch or in your neighbor's yard that has some potential and turning it, you never know what you're going to come up with, and you never know what species are out there when you're looking for different found woods. So try turning whatever you find. Here is the final piece. This is dried and equalized. There's very little moisture in this. It is not moving anymore. And look how nice this little guy turned out. Not only is it a beautiful small bowl, but the bark is all intact, and nowhere on here does it feel loose or feel as if it's going to just pop off there. This was turned several months ago and it is stabilized, or equalized. Now, when we get into equalized, the term equalized, that's what we mean when, that's the actual term that we need to use instead of saying the word dry. When we say dry, it sounds as if there's no moisture in the wood at all, but there is always moisture in every piece of wood, no matter what it is, furniture, whatever you have, there's always moisture in it. When that moisture content of the wood equalizes to the surrounding air, that's when they're equalized. And that's what we're looking for with our turn bowls. So this isn't wet by any means, but it's not totally dry, it's equalized. Anyway, this turned out to be a really nice piece. It's just a gorgeous bowl to have on the counter, throw the keys in it and have it around. It's a great opportunity to have a piece of nature in the house. That's what I love about this particular bowl. The next bowl is probably one of my favorites. This video was all about making a handheld sized bowl. A bowl that you can put in between both your hands and hold it. And it's not huge, but it's got a decent enough size that it's very useful. It could be used for food. It could be used for a variety of different things. This one turned out really nice. It's relatively thin. The walls are about 1/8 of an inch thick throughout, and it's relatively thin for a bowl this size. Now this one I got quite a few comments on it. People were thinking this is going to distort and change shape and going to crack and cause problems, but as you can see, it hasn't. And yeah, this was turned earlier this year. This is turned almost half a year ago. So this is in really great example of a once turned bowl that has maintained its shape. Now, if you look at the rim, you can actually see a little bit of movement. The grains expanded and contracted to make the rim just a touch irregular here, but it's very hard to see. And the circle shape is pretty much here. Now, why is that? Why did this occur? Now, if I were to take a different species of wood that's really wet and turn a bowl this size, there's a good chance that bowl can almost fold up on itself when it dries. This particular piece is pecan, which is a fruit wood or a nut wood. It was relatively dry. This has a characteristic of holding the moisture, obviously right after it's cut, but then drying pretty quickly and getting most of that movement out of itself very quickly compared to other woods. So if you have a piece of pecan that sat around for half a year or even a year, it seems to dry out quicker than most other woods. And when that moisture is gone, you're going to have less movement after you do a once turned bowl. And that's what we're seeing here. This bowl being turned once barely moved as it dried, which is great. So there's almost no reason to twice turn a piece like this. So this turned out really, really nice. I enjoy this. This has a lacquer finish on it. It's just a really cool bowl to hold on to and just kind of feel that shape. It's just a great piece. Now, the next bowl didn't turn out so great, and there were some issues with that involving cracking in that. Now, I want to share with you guys something else before we jump into that one. I've got an online course called Tree to Bowl, Understanding Green Wood. In that course, we are going to cover tons of information about understanding trees, how they grow, and how they form, how to process wood, whether you are just using a couple pieces of wood that you found in the ditch, or maybe your neighbor brought a log over for you, or if you're going to harvest an entire tree. This course is going to help you understand exactly how to get the most out of all of the wood that you process and turn. Do yourself a huge favor. If you're going to be processing any of your own wood to turn, check out this course. I'm going to put a link in the description below. Click that link and go check out this course. I think you're going to see the value in it, and you're going to be able to get a lot more yield out of the wood that you bring home or that you process for your turn bowls. Okay, now I'm going to share a piece with you that many might consider a fail. However, I'm pretty optimistic about this one. This is from my ditch wood video, which is a pretty fun little video. You might want to check that out. And this piece is a lot different than most of my other bowls because this was an in-grain turning. Most of the bowl blanks that I use, I do a side grain mounted bowl blank. And one of the reasons is what I'm going to share with you right now. And here we go. There it is. This was the in-grain, really shallow bowl that utilizes the whole inside of the tree. And when we cut with the grain like this, or use the in-grain, there's a lot of tension on this piece when it's drying. And it really needs to be stabilized much more during the drying process than what I provided for it. What happened was this particular pine, which is a softwood, and it has the characteristics of drying really quickly and cracking. So this particular in-grain turning could be accomplished with different tree species without this crack. The pine contributed to this as well. So what happened is essentially all of these rings are drying and contracting and pulling on one another as they dry and move towards the center, and there's got to be a give somewhere. So we have this major crack that occurred here, and we have a couple smaller little cracks here. These could be filled pretty easily. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, that's a total fail. That should be thrown away or whatever. But you could look at the other sides. The glass is half full or it's half empty. I choose half full because this is actually a pretty cool design feature. We could easily put little bow ties in here or like butterfly inserts to keep this from expanding anymore. It probably isn't going to move much more, but it becomes like a decorative element. I've seen people actually drill small holes on both sides of a crack like this and then use metal wire like copper or brass and weave it, almost like lacing a shoe, which is also kind of cool aesthetically to look at. So I may still do something like that. Another thing that's really cool about this bowl is that you get to see the whole life of this tree. You can count out all of the rings of this tree, and I just discovered that this tree was actually 2 years older than me, which is pretty cool. And it just tells the whole history. And if you're into this and you study it, there's people that actually study tree rings and understand what happens to the environment where this tree was growing based on these tree rings. And you can see that in here. You can see how some of the growth rings during the summer months when this tree was growing the most, how some of them are very narrow on some years compared to other years. And that could have to do with heat. It could have things to do with how much water or rain there was that particular year. It's pretty cool because you're looking at history here. You're looking at an environmental history or a study of the particular area where this tree grew. So yeah, it would have been nice if this didn't crack here, but like I said, it can be patched. It can be finished. Now, I didn't do any more finishing on this either. This can be sanded and more finish can be applied to this. So, but that crack needs to be addressed before I do that. And I still think this is a pretty cool piece. So tell me in the comments below what you think. Is this a glass half full, like I think, or is it a glass half empty and we just need to chuck this? All right, in this next video, the rule breaker, I broke a rule. And that rule is leaving the pith in the side of a side grain mounted bowl blank. Typically, we try to avoid the pith because the pith, again, is in the center of that log and it has the most tension on it, and it typically cracks and has issues. So we typically don't leave the pith in the bowl. Whether that pith is located at the base of the bowl or along the rim, we typically will move into the wood material so that that pith is gone and it doesn't become a structural issue causing cracks. Now, I break that rule occasionally and fill in any minor cracks that might be along a rim, things like that. But with this particular bowl, I actually really broke the rule. I put the pith right square through the center of the bowl on both sides, and here is the piece equalized. This is now stable. This sits in the house. It's stabilized and equalized to the indoor temperature, and it's not changing weight. That means it's dried or equalized. And look at it. The piths, while they had a stress fracture here, they didn't crack open. We also had some stress cracks along the outside of the log. Those I thought might be a little more of a problem, but they seem to be held together pretty well also. Now, I also have the bark intact. Now, this is ligustrum. This is a particular tree, and again, this is what I mentioned too, is look for any type of wood you can find. Ligustrum, where I live, is typically grown as shrubs, and it's more decorative, more for landscaping. You'll see these in smaller shrubs that are maybe 4 to 6 feet high, but the older ones can become larger. This I was very fortunate to get from a friend that had it. There was a very old tree that got blown down in a tornado, believe it or not. But this is pretty rare at this size. Usually they're 4 to 6 inches, maybe 10 to 12 centimeters, the limbs. But again, keep your eye out because you don't know what you're going to find. There's some great wood out there to turn. And it turns out the ligustrum is in the same family as the olive tree. And I think you can see that resemblance here. If you've ever worked or seen olive wood, you see the resemblance there in this wood. It's a very dense wood that is structurally holds together and doesn't have as much tension issues as far as cracking as some other woods do, especially like the pine that I just showed you a second ago. Now, interestingly, like I predicted in the video where I turned this, the pith appears to pull outward. And what happens is while this dried, the sides pull up and the top pulls in. And what that gave me is the appearance, this more boxy appearance of the curve. Now, in order to prevent this look, what I needed to do is perhaps make this curve a little bit more exaggerated. So instead of leaving it as open as I did, I needed to make it a little bit shallower or steeper, I guess you could say. Because what happens is that pith area seems to have the appearance as if they move out, and that's giving it almost this boxy look to it. It's not bad. I just wish it were a little bit more smooth as far as this transition of the curve out here. I think it turned out pretty well, and it's intact. This is dry and this is stabilized. There's no reason for this to crack or move anymore. This is what it's going to look like. So again, everybody that thought when I turned this, oh, that's going to crack into a million pieces, this is the end result. So you can have good results with various wood. That brings up another point is what you really want to do is you want to take the time to experiment. You have to experiment with the particular tree species. If you have a tree species in your area that is common to that area and you know you can get on a regular basis, it's a great idea to take some of it and turn it and just play with it. Leave the pith in some of it and turn a bowl with the pith in it like this and just see what happens. If it cracks all up, then you know it's probably going to crack up. And you're going to know in the future that you probably don't want to leave the pith in it. But if it doesn't, then you can get away with bowls like this. So experimentation is great. The thing that's a little bit tricky is if you get a ton of different tree species. If you have people bringing a log to you from one type of tree and another type of tree, and you turn one today and you turn a different one today, it's going to be kind of hard to keep track of which tree species does what. It's nice to focus on one or two maybe and really start to understand the characteristics and qualities of that wood so that you know what to expect when you turn. And then that gives you the opportunity to kind of push the boundaries a little bit and do something like this potentially if that particular tree species will allow it. All right, this next bowl that I'm going to share with you guys is probably one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites because there were so many unknowns with this particular piece. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, and those are usually the best kind of bowls. This was the most dangerous bowl. You might have seen this video. I'll put a link up here if you want to see that. This bowl was dangerous for a variety of different reasons. This is live oak burl. And if you look at it, and if you imagine, if you've ever made cookies, and you imagine cookie dough, and you take a big glob of cookie dough and you maybe roll it out and then just kind of wad it together and smoosh it together, that's kind of what we've got going with the grain direction in here. There is no direction. When you're turning burl, all of the supported grain cuts and the direction of which you use the bull gouge kind of goes out the window because you're not moving across any particular wood grain. Now, because of that, there's actually some benefits for drying. If you think of how plywood is made with multiple layers of wood that are alternating in their grain direction. That's what gives plywood its strength. Well, that's kind of what gives burl its strength as well. As you have wood grain, see, I can see some here going this way. I can see some over in this middle part that are coming up through the middle. So it's a little bit tricky to turn something like this. You just have to go slow and take your time, knowing that there are going to be moments when you're turning against the grain and you just need to have your tools very sharp and just make nice slicing cuts and take your time doing it. Now, what made this really dangerous was that these outer parts started breaking away and they started coming loose and they needed to be taped down. If you haven't seen this video, you want to check out this video because this was actually a little bit hair-raising at moments. I thought for sure that these outer parts were just going to go flying off and I would be left with just this little part in the middle, but it all held out. Now, the biggest question I get about this one is, why didn't you just use resin and resin this whole piece? Well, it's a tough one. I don't mind resin, but I don't like to do things that other people are doing. I don't like to do trendy things like resin bowls necessarily. And to resin this, it would have taken a lot of resin and it would have lost a lot of the characteristics of the wood that you're seeing here. Here I can see the wood, I can touch it, I can feel all the wormholes and all the different separations and all of that. If I had coated this in resin, all of that would be lost and I'd basically be looking at a chunk of wood suspended in plastic. And it can be cool, don't get me wrong, I've seen plenty of really cool resin bowls. It's just not something that interests me right now. I might do it down the road, but for right now, I like the challenge of turning this piece and making it all stay together and then seeing what happens. So the other advantage of what I was getting at about the different grain direction is this dried pretty evenly. It didn't move a whole bunch. When we have really organized rows of wood grain, they tend to do things together. It's like pull together on themselves and pull in. But because there's so many different directions here, it's almost as if it just kind of dried and moved into its place. You almost don't see any movement as far as the wings coming up or anything like that. It's pretty much held its exact shape from when I took it off the lathe, even though it's dry now or equalized. So this was a really fun one to turn and it's pretty stable. It didn't fall apart and it stayed together really well. So there you have it. There are 5 bowls that I've turned in previous videos. Now be sure to check out those links and you can watch those other videos if you haven't seen how these were made. And you get to see what they look like afterwards. Now, most of these have been done for months and they're equalized and dry. It's pretty cool to be able to see them after the fact and share these with you guys because I get a lot of questions, people asking, what happened to that bowl? Did that break apart? There's no way that stayed together. Well, there you can see. The one with the pine obviously did have a pretty substantial crack on it. That's going to be a nice piece. I will finish that at some point and that will be a really nice turn bowl as well. I hope that you guys understand that everything doesn't have to be perfect when you turn. There's going to be things that happen and you're going to learn more about your turning style, the type of timber that you're turning, and all of the things that go into that the more you turn. So take your time, turn more bowls, and you're going to see a lot more results that are favorable, and you're going to start learning a ton about the species that you turn. So you're going to be able to make some beautiful bowls no matter what. And if you've got questions about what to do with the wood that you're preparing to turn, be sure to check out my Tree to Bowl Understanding Green Wood online course. You're going to learn a ton there, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Oh, and it's fully guaranteed, so check that out. Do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. And if you're not subscribing, click that subscribe button and click the bell. That way you'll be notified when each of my videos comes out. And I've got tons more videos on the way that you're not going to want to miss. All right, guys, until next time, as always, happy turning.